In this last Debunking Economics podcast before Christmas, we ignore the elephant in the room. We won't talk about politics in Britain. Instead, it's back to the economics textbooks. Chapter 1, one of the basics of traditional economic thinking, the concept of opportunity cost, the idea that with limited resources, you can't do everything, so you need to consider the cost of doing something versus doing something else. As a basic principle, it sounds difficult to argue against, doesn't it? But that doesn't mean we won't. It's the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. We all know the basic idea of opportunity cost. Every decision you make is at the expense of another. You marry your partner, for example, at the expense of not marrying anyone else, at least in the short term. You spend money on something, you can't spend that money on something else. So, Steve, I can see this working in a business setting, sort of. If I invest in option A, I get a better return than investing in option B, supposedly. I mean, but we also hear politicians talking about it. We spend on education at the expense of not spending more on health, for example. Does it have to be an either-or question in every aspect of the economy?
No, and this is one of the reasons that opportunity cost is one of these things which neoclassical economists, if you put them in a corner and say what's something economics has contributed to understanding that is non-obvious, they'll come up with either the theory of comparative advantage or opportunity cost. And I'm afraid I go both of them as malarkey when you try to apply them to an overall national economy. But they appeal. The reason they get into people's psyche is they make sense at the individual level. And this is what then people extrapolate from the individual to what happens to the collective, and I'm sorry, the extrapolation breaks down the concept.
Well, it gets complicated as well pretty quickly, doesn't it? Even if you look at that personal level. So say you're having a conversation with the family. What are we going to do today, kids? Are we going to do A or B? And then someone, and you feel like that's you can look at the pros and cons of that until someone comes along with options C, D, and E, and then it gets so bloody complicated you end up going nowhere and doing nothing.
Yeah. But the fundamental argument, I've seen this with in a book by Arjo Klama, a conversation with economists, where he was talking to somebody who's responsible for the whole rational expectations so-called revolution. I call it devolution. But that economist was using as an argument if his wife that they should hire a gardener to mow the lawn rather than him, because his opportunity cost, if he was actually working in economic theory, then that he's earning, let's say he's making $100 an hour out of that, in a highly regarded non-mainstream economist. But if he was out in the garden, he'd only be earning, he could hire somebody for say $15. Let's say $10 an hour. Yeah. So the opportunity cost of him was $90 an hour, and it's far better if he stayed inside working in the economic theory. And the Arjo Klama made the mistake of interviewing his wife about that observation. He said he doesn't do economic theory. He sits and watch the football game.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So it is one of these false equivalences that we use 100% of our time in a productive way, and therefore if you have that situation, you're better off,
I'm on his side, though. Perhaps he needed to rest so that his brain is more fine-tuned. So when he does do the work, he does better work, perhaps. That's the argument I'd be using anyway.
Unfortunately,
still working on that because we've just...
so I don't swallow that one.
Yeah, we've also got... I'm working on this one because we've just got a new house. It's got a lawn, and I know I'm going to have to mow it unless I get someone else to do it. And so I'm still working on the argument. So that one's not going to work, clearly. But I mean, if we go back to the basics of all of this, though, it's the foundation of economics, isn't it? That economics is all about the scarcity of resources, and resources obviously are finite. There's a certain amount of, if we go back to the source of it all, there's only a certain amount of power we can get from the sun. How we tap that energy, we might be getting better at it, but it's still a finite resource, and that is the fundamental definition of economics, isn't it? Being economical with what we've got.
What it's done is completely take attention away from the important stuff, because opportunity cost fundamentally applies to what you currently have. And that's when you currently have 24 hours in a day. You're not going to have more than that. Or less. So you've got to allocate them, and it's a question of how you allocate. And if with existing resources, you can allocate the particular processes. There are some which give you more output than others, so your best thing is to allocate the resources to those specific uses right now. But what actually has meant we're harnessing more of that energy coming from the sun, or more of the energy the sun has left behind 65 million years ago in the form of black stuff underground, that is investment. That is changing the resources with which you work. And so economics, with its opportunity cost focus, has focuses upon specialization and using existing resources more efficiently. That is not what gives you growth. That is what that's the afterthought. That what gives you growth is developing new ways to do things and changing what you're currently doing and developing an entirely new entry into that range of current possibilities. So I see opportunity cost as part of the fixation economists have on specialization when they should have a fixation upon investment and development.
Right. So there is my answer. When my wife says, are you going to mow the lawn because you're not going to pay for a gardener? I can say, no, let's pay for a gardener while I work on inventing something that will enable the lawn to mow itself.
And that's the investment answer.
And then I just watch the TV.
I mean, that's going to happen. I mean, we've got one of those vacuum cleaners that that runs around the floor, vacuuming it, and that's going to happen over time. And that is the real sign of development in capitalism over time has got bugger all to do with opportunity cost. Well, it's innovation taking a risk and stuff that's going to fail that is an essential part of capitalism succeeding.
So when we think of opportunity cost, I mean, when you look at examples, and I was thinking, okay, I'll just look at just to Google opportunity cost and see how other people are defining it. And almost always, even if you look at economics lectures, it's almost always that example of a personal decision. You do this at the expense of doing something else. Where is it used in economics? Where do economists, mainstream economists, use it as a useful working, or not useful, but how do they see it as being useful in the work they do?
It really, unfortunately, is the organizing principle of their brains. And that is why they obsess about specialization and efficiency rather than talking about innovation and development over time. And it's to me, it's one of those distorting fundamental visions they have. So if we go back to you mentioned the definition of economics being about scarcity. I haven't got the Lionel Robbins quote right in front of me, but Lionel Robbins, who was actually an Austrian economist, not a neoclassical, he invented the definition of economics as a science that studies the allocation of scarce resources, the satisfaction of unlimited wants using scarce resources that have alternative uses. Now, I'm emphasizing the final part of the phrase: scarce resources that have alternative uses. Okay. Can you tell me what alternative use you can put a steel mill to? Can you, for example, make your coffee with a blast furnace?
No.
Okay.
I could knock it all down and build a hotel. But
okay. This is the thing. We create specific machinery for specific purpose that they do not have a function elsewhere apart from that industry. Yeah. And this whole opportunity cost implies, I can go and allocate my time to something else. Well, as a human being, yes, you can. You can mow the lawn. You can record a podcast. You can even tinker to see if you can make a self-driving lawnmower. But as an economy and an industry, once you build up a specific type of machinery, then it doesn't have any other alternative. There is no opportunity alternative for a blast furnace. Once you've got it, it's solid, and it has only that usage. And this, again, is one of those distorting elements.
And that is actually just the beginning of our deconstruction of the usefulness of opportunity cost. If you want to hear more, then you have to listen to the podcast in full, and you can do that by subscribing at debunkingeconomics.com or becoming a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof. Steve Keen. Have a good Christmas. We're back again the week after Christmas with another episode from the Debunking Economics podcast series. I'm Phil Dobbie. He's Steve Keen. We'll see you then.